Good morning, Azeroth.
It's
Welcome to
beautiful.
the live stream. I'm Kenny McBride. I'm a 3D character artist on the World of Warcraft team. And on the character team, we do all sorts of fun stuff. Player characters, customization, as well as mounts, creatures, bosses, armors, weapons, all sorts of cool stuff. Pretty much anything that's handled and animated by a player character.
Oh, so that's my cue now.
That's your cue.
My name is Ian Lang. I am the much less famous Ian that usually inhabits this room. I'm on the animation team for World of Warcraft. And so the things we do are, we work very closely with these guys. So any of the movements that we have, any of the attacks, emotes that we see through our characters and creatures, and we work on all the mounts, bosses, all that great stuff.
All the stuff that moves.
All the stuff that moves, yeah. So we are, even though we're just a character art team and animation, we're kind of representing a lot more the broader team as a whole, environment, effects, dungeon. So we'll speak for them and hope they don't hurt us afterwards for mischaracterizing.
Yeah.
But
Today,
yeah, go ahead.
Today we want to talk about the art of Battle for Azeroth, more specifically the allied races of the Zandalari trolls and the Koltiran humans.
Yeah, and kind of we'll probably hit on a couple things that sort of surround that as well, maybe some blood trolls or something like that, because that all does kind of feed back into it.
And for us, it's also like kind of discussing, we're just going to freely talk about how our experiences were on the team, and also as a whole, how the team evolved from an initial concept to what you see in the game now.
Yeah, and speaking about the Colts and the Kolterans, there we go. I'm going to get that out of the way early. Kolterans and Zandalaris, they are playable around the week of March 12th. So get ready.
Yeah.
Get prepared. So let's start with kind of in the beginning, why we thought allied races were an important thing to chase. There's obviously a design aspect to it and a lore aspect to it of why we wanted to. But for art, why we thought this was an important thing to kind of follow up. So I'm going to let you start with that, buddy.
Well, let's go back in time for a second. Let's go all the way back to Burning Crusade.
Ooh, God, you went back.
Yeah, I know, that's a little far back.
Okay.
Burning Crusade, we first introduced a new race into the game from the original races, and we had the Draenei and the Blood Elves. And at that time, we were expanding the playable races to characters and creatures that ultimately are part of the world of Azeroth and Draenor and the entirety of the lore of the game. And as we've gone on, we've done more of that. We've added goblins and worgen, and then eventually we've been able to offer more and more of experiences to players as player characters, as creatures, characters that would exist and flesh out the world. So as we've done with allied races now, we've done that even more so where we're doing heritage armor sets.
Really fleshing out that.
We've also done custom mounts and everything, and we've done it in a broader stroke now. We've launched a few allied races, and now coming up we have the Zandalari troll and the Koltiras humans. And what's really important about them now is they're very, very pivotal to the expansion Battle for Azeroth.
Absolutely, yeah.
You've seen them throughout the game thus far, and they'll now be playable March 12th.
March 12th. Ooh, good hit.
Yeah.
Now just kind of just so everybody kind of knows, you have an affinity for the Dark Iron Dwarves, right?
I do. I was very, very excited when we announced that we were going to come out with Dark Iron Dwarves. I played a Dwarf Paladin, a typical Bronzebeard, but now I'm like, oh, I can be a Dark Iron, just like that in Molten Core. What? So I was extremely excited for that. And then also the idea that you could unlock a heritage armor set. I'm still working on that, but I've unlocked the Dark Iron Dwarves, and now I'm looking forward to being a mage in plate armor.
Ooh,
yeah.
that's gonna look hot.
So, yeah, so that's my personal passion for that. It led me to also create the mount for them, the Paladin mount for the Dwarves, and also I worked on heritage armors for the Void Elves. And various other people on the character team have worked on different armor sets, and it's a very fun way to kind of express something very special about that character race.
Which is fun animation-wise too. When you guys kind of create those mounts for us, it's always a nice opportunity when we get to add something specific for them, just to kind of polish them up and update them to a point where you feel really, really sort of unique by owning that mount. It's always a great opportunity to do that. So, which we got to do a lot of with the Kolterans and the Zandalaris as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, kind of skipping a little bit ahead. So, kind of talking about the Kolterans and Zandalaris, one of the first things that we do when we kind of start this process artistically, right, is, we talk to designers, we talk to lore, so we kind of have a bit of a...
Where do we start?
Where do we start, exactly.
Looking back, it's so easy to be like, oh, y'all made an entire new zone. And
Yeah.
made all these characters and creatures.
Oh, it's always easy looking back.
Yeah, where did that all start?
Right. So one of the first things I remember seeing, I think we have the sigils for these characters as well. This was some of the first art that I started seeing of the Zuldazar and Koltaros.
Absolutely.
And I remember that being, okay, so you already kind of know where you want to begin, sort of maybe some color aspects to it, some architectural aspects to it. You already begin seeing these. And for animation purposes, we're kind of late in the process. We don't have, we have quite a bit of time when it comes to, actually before we actually get animating.
Yeah.
So we just start seeing all this art that starts coming through and just starts like, it sort of envelops into this one little moment where we're like, oh, we get it. Like it just starts kind of building on itself. So these are always really great to see though, because they immediately, you already see something that you want to kind of grab onto. And so these are always a good starting point. And then taking that, so I know one of the questions is, do we start just modeling something and then kind of build design and lore on top of that? Or do we start in the design and lore aspect? And the reality is, it's a little bit of both. I mean,
yeah, I would say so.
The process, and I think kind of coming back to your point, is at the end of everything, it always feels like, oh, that was just an obvious decision that we made. And we're like, oh yeah, well this is just how we had to do it. But in the beginning, it's not. Yeah. So to kind of come, do we have the ice waterfall as well? Yeah, I'm gonna keep doing this. Like we got people helping us out here.
Yeah. Make your control room.
Yeah, exactly. So again, this kind of so even though we kind of knew we wanted to do something with the Kolterans, we needed to start sort of fleshing out these environment ideas. And this was one of the earlier images I remember seeing, and you already get a sense of what you might expect from these Kolterans.
Absolutely. And to kind of like go back to what you were saying about, where do we start with this stuff? This is obviously the early stages of where we're starting to do environment illustrations. Previously we had up the Zuldazar font as well as the Koltiras. Yeah. And you were saying it's a mix of starting with either lore or just modeling things or just starting to draw things.
Because it's exploration,
and
right?
It's a little bit of both. And I think every artist kind of treats it different, depending on whether you're working with the designer specifically on something, or if it's a broad stroke thing that the art director is kind of trying to implement. And for example, lore is extremely important.
Oh,
for as much as we're creating new experiences in a world that is very elaborate, a lot of things have been kind of set in stone in a sense that this is a living, breathing world, but we also have the opportunity as artists, designers, storytellers to go and implement things that weren't maybe as elaborated on.
Right.
So it's really easy for us to go back and hey, back in Warcraft, the Koltirans showed up for a quest, and they're hinted at. The Zandalari trolls are hinted at as the origins of Azeroth, one of the earliest races on the planet.
And we see them a little bit kind of sprinkled through Azeroth as well. So we kind of have that idea already kind of starting, that nexus of a creation.
And, you can even compare that to existing races that we have unlocked, like the Worgen and the Draenei. They're all hinted at some point or another because they're part of this bigger story. They don't just suddenly appear.
Right.
And then when we do get to experience their home world or where they're from on Azeroth, then we really get to go, hey, let's look at this in more detail. So where does it start? Is some of these early images, like the shots that we had up before of the Zuldazar and Koltiran were kind of the first thing that the art team as a whole got to see as the new approach to what we were going to do. And then slowly we moved into environment concepts because those are kind of that's the world that everything's going to exist in. Yeah. You're going to see the plains, the lands, the jungle, this or that, the cities. And that's where we start to hone things in from an idea or a story or something that was hinted at in the game previously and kind of bring it together into a playable experience, a new zone, new characters, new items.
It sort of has this evolution to it, which I think is really fascinating because you have all these ideas and a lot of things that are just not going to work. But starting from that kind of the zone and environment idea then kind of helps to inform some of the decisions we made. Actually, yeah, this is a great image right here. Sorry, I'm seeing another.
Wow, cool image.
Yeah, there it is. Boom. That's on screen.
I remember this because early on, you're thinking Koltiran, they're like humans,
But how do we make them distinct? How do we give them their own sort of identity to them?
What differentiates them from the other human factions across Azeroth? Loiteron has its own look. Stormwind has its own look for various reasons. Sure. Loiteron looks very different. But this was very telling in that like they're a seafaring, group of people.
Right. Again, because I was being already being informed by those other images that we were seeing, right, with all the ships and this sort of like ice and sea and harsh landscape. And so we had what is sort of a pub or a house or a cottage look like in this particular area?
Absolutely.
Right. And this one's always really great because I remember one of the funny things about this one was. After we kind of saw this image, I know a lot of the artists were like, okay, go sort of like blue sky some ideas in terms of like really kind of helping to kind of flesh out more of the
and
identity.
by blue sky, that means when
the
art team is like, hey, everyone, we've got a starting point.
Yeah.
Start coming up with ideas.
Yeah, just help out, right?
Wherever you
Flesh it
feel
out.
passionate about something, start coming up with ideas.
Yeah. But I remember as it came back, the tentacles keep coming in, like there are tentacles everywhere. Just and I don't know, maybe there is no such thing as too many tentacles. But
then we paired it up with anchors.
Well, then anchors. Then you got the tentacles and the anchors. At least now you're mixing it up a little bit.
And it became a very strong motif.
Exactly. And then that motif really started to hit really hard. And so you had this sort of like strong cultural identity to the sea. And that we really started just kind of building upon that over and over and over again. And you really do see that in the buildings themselves. You have some buildings that might sort of have this ship-like shape to them.
It's almost like they built them out of ships, or they're so good at building ships, because that's what they're kind of known for.
They just like that
The
design.
Courtiers are known for like the ultimate navy of Azeroth.
Exactly.
That maybe their houses kind of look like ships as well. And we have some examples of some of the environments of the early stages of design.
And these are just so wonderful to kind of see because, again, coming back to that point, like animation is always a little bit further down the pipeline. We're just seeing all these like wonderful images come through, and we're just like, can't wait to get our hands on it. Let's do it. Let's do this.
And that's what's really cool about, I'd say, the development cycle for art in general, is that one person does something, and they're like, whoa, that's really awesome. I'm gonna riff off that now, come up with something, and then it like multiplies. We have a of people on the team. It's not just us two guys making this game.
I know they put us here, but there's more. There's more, I promise.
So after a while, you get this like echo of like everyone kind of feeding off of different ideas. And you're saying like in animation, y'all are a little further down the production line, but character art's looking at what props are starting to make. They're looking at what level design's starting to do, the environments, other illustrations by other artists, and we're like, that was really cool. I think I'm gonna elaborate on that. Or just cross-communication between all the disciplines and kind of building up this idea together. Because as we look at some of these final images of things, like of the game, or as you're playing the game today, it didn't exist at one point. There was a time when we were still planning all of this out, and it's kind of fun to sit back retrospectively and see, wow, look what as a team we've produced. This guy is a good point as well, because he's kind of one of the first iterations for the Coultieran as they are today. This is before we had sculpted, modeled, or made anything for the new Coultieran character.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this was just after some of those earlier concepts we've been showing. And we're like, hey, let's make a new human body type.
So you guys are really starting to try and hone in on the particular sort of nautical aspects you guys want to...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of the motifs in this early illustration echo through either weapons, armor. The heritage armor set is very similar to this in some regards. He has the trench coat, which was really cool for us to do. And some of the expression in the face, as well as like the facial hair. Because what's cool about the new allied races is we did a full new suite of characters. They have the hairstyles. They also have the skin colors and also the different beards and earrings and things. And this is kind of like this is where it started, which is cool to see because now we've fleshed it out so much.
Yeah.
So.
So that sort of that anchor right there kind of reminded me, just real quick. So the haymaker. I remember when we were sort of working on their the racial spell. There was, again, kind of talking about this idea of sort of blue skying concepts. There was, I was talking to the designer at the time, and we were like, well, what exactly are we going to do? Like, what does this look like? What does this kind of haymaker idea look like? And at first, like, the ideas we were coming up with were just like real wild. I mean, we were just like, what if he does like some crazy Popeye thing and it's just like his arm turns into an anchor or something like that, right? I mean, so it's one of those things where you start really kind of wild and extreme sometimes in the beginning, because as you sort of develop and as you kind of iterate on it, that process is going to get kind of whittled down just a little bit. But by the time you get to that point where you're like, okay, yes, this works functionally because it actually speaks to the kit that we have. Because ultimately, like, let's say we did do something with the crazy anchor. That doesn't really work with who the Colterans are, right? It's they're not really that sort of that sort of identity, right? They're kind of harsh and realistic and
very practical.
Very very practical. And so we kind of ended up having to change a little bit of how we wanted to work on that Haymaker design, and just so people don't feel like we're just talking about Colterans all the time, because I'm sure that might be coming up. That kind of really, that difference really shows a separation between what we wanted to do with the Zandalari, right? So you have all these cultural identities of like the Anchor having this heavy sort of practical aspect to them. And we see that even in guard poses that you would see in Kulturas. And then you pair that with sort of the Zandalari, who have this very different kind of kit to them.
Yes.
Whether it's the motifs that we ended up doing, whether it's the druid forms, sort of the color design, and we'll go into a little bit of the color language later, which I think is really fascinating for a lot of the people. And so even the way that we would want to, in animation, how we would want to pose a Colteran versus how we would want to pose a Zandalari was just drastically different. So talking about sort of the motifs, what were some of the motifs you thought were really important in the Zandalari themselves? Because I know sort of anchors and tentacles and this sort of like seafaring aspect was the Colterans, but for the Zandalari,
yes.
What did that look like?
So Colteran, as we were saying, they're very naval. They're very like prestigious in their own right, but very like seafaring, and everything's kind of worn, rusted, barnacles growing on things. Whereas by contrast, the Zandalari are very rich and warm. A lot of golds, a lot of angular, well-crafted shapes.
I love some of those, like the design work inside those pyramids too. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
Absolutely, and there's that kind of contrast too. Is like though there may be like the swirls of tentacles in Coltiras, they have like, swirly shapes as well that are on a lot of, but it's very angular, almost like temples. And
do we have any of those? I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
we see a little bit of it here. Yeah.
Yeah, these are some of the earlier designs of like the Mesoamerican inspired like temples of Aztec and Mayan, and kind of giving it that very ancient worldly feel that these might have been built a long time ago. And that's kind of like the Zandalari's vibe in general, is that they're one of the oldest, if not the oldest race on Azeroth, and it's prehistoric.
Yeah.
And by that nature as well, dinosaurs. So we started introducing a lot of creatures that were designed to kind of feature their culture, is that they also are very Loa focused.
Right.
And for the trolls, even trolls that exist outside of the Zandalari culture, Loas are extremely important to them, which is animal gods that are represented in various forms. So this is where we're like, hey, let's start doing dinosaur Loas, and we started getting to create all sorts of cool things like that.
But that wasn't always an obvious choice in the beginning, correct?
That's for the druids.
For the druids, okay, so the druid forms, okay.
Yeah, which we can delve into that.
We will delve into that, absolutely. I skipped a little bit then, I guess. But for the, and they do kind of have this sort of like a primalistic, proud aspect to them, right? And you see that in everything that they do, right? You see that in the way that they construct their cities, the way that they lay out the sort of the city plan, in the design aspects of them, in the way that they kind of hold themselves. And I know for animation, we already kind of had an idea of what we wanted to do because they're already in the game a bit. So we had something to kind of build off of, but it was so great kind of seeing how design and lore and art kind of picked up that mantle and just really fleshed out this beautiful, beautiful like zone.
Yes.
Like I still look at it sometimes. I love just like perching up into the very top and just sort of like,
trying to unlock Dark Iron Dwarves, I spent a lot of time in Zuldazar. So yeah, I got to see a lot. It's beautiful. It does always come back to dwarves. Dwarves are awesome.
Such a theme.
But what's really cool too is that like these are trolls. What makes them different from the trolls we have already in the game? Right. And what I think this is something we kind of mentioned earlier is why allied races, is that some of these cultures are a lot more diverse and a lot more unique, even though they're still trolls. So a lot of the other trolls are very like island-esque, very tribal-ish. And when you look at the Zandalari by comparison, very much so they have a hierarchy and in a way that everything works.
There are those aspects to it. Yeah.
It doesn't, but it's not as tribal. It's very like grounded and foundational in this amazing structural city, and it's got prestige to it. They're an extremely prehistoric race that also exemplifies wealth and honor.
Very regal in a lot of ways.
We're also with like the animations, like how do you distinguish, say, a human animation to a Coltiran, or how do you distinguish a troll to a Zandalari troll?
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to sort of this shape language, right? So this idea of shape language is how the silhouette of the model itself kind of helps to dictate a lot of, or sort of inform the way we want to end up working on some of this posing. Now you have that shape, that silhouette is again informed by the design or lore that we want to end up doing, right? So we knew that this race was supposed to be very proud, very sort of regal, right? You know, they got all this gold everywhere. So we knew already that they had to kind of had this confidence about them that is only from someone who's been around for a long time, right? It's always like those creatures that are immortal in the movies are always very confident, right?
Yes.
So we already kind of had an idea, or a jumping off point, I should say, from earlier in the game. So we really just wanted to sort of flesh out more of that kit, right? So you see something like the Zandalari stand. His male stand is like his shoulders are up and his sort of they're kind of back a little bit and his head's sort of raised a little bit more, and that kind of that accentuates the fact that very confident, very proud.
Yes.
He loves
like,
where he comes from.
Hunching like an old troll.
Yeah, or
You
like
gotta-
hunching
you
like an
gotta
old
sit
troll.
up proper and be prestigious.
It's like, no, I'm happy.
Yes.
I'm very good. I'm very
I
good.
think I'm more comfortable as this kind of troll, though.
That's the troll you inhibit?
Hunching, yeah.
And then you have a very different sort of pose from the Colterans, who they are strong in their own right, you know, but they're strong because they've kind of existed in a place that is not very habitable, right? You know, it's very harsh, very unforgiving, and there's this sort of
Grit.
Grit. That's a great
Yeah.
idea. Oh, I'm gonna steal that. I'm stealing it for later. But this sort of grit about them that you can, it's sort of palpable, and like just even the way the Colteran male pose sort of like sits. And so then kind of coming back to a little bit of this shape language and how it's so important. So a lot of that is this conversation again of like, what do we want them to be? And so when you guys finally, you know, bless us with these models for us to work with, we do. Oh yeah, that was it. Actually, I was going to talk about that. So this is a great example. So sorry, I wasn't even paying attention. I'm looking at random places.
I'm so engaged.
I know. Thank you. So you have. So this is the Colteran. So these are actually the same pose. This is the Colteran male pose. And again, this works for him because he's this giant square, right? Like he's just this giant mass of a human. And so with that, there are a lot of things like we already have a direction of how we want to take this. So you have this pose that is very sort of indicative of this large mass of someone who has to hold it, right? This pose just wouldn't work on a smaller creature. So I took this Colteran pose and actually dropped it right onto the Blood Elf female, which is just, she's what, half, maybe less than half his size.
She looks barbaric.
She looks like she's trying something.
It doesn't read as Blood Elf anymore.
And that's the thing. It's like it doesn't read as what her kit is. So these poses really, you know, we go back to the motifs. You know, you've got very specific design shapes inside their buildings, and now you have very specific design shapes in the way that we model the character, and now we have very specific shapes that we have for the animations itself. And I was talking with my lead earlier, and we were talking about how important shape language is in anything we do, because it has this sort of unconscious, it speaks unconsciously to a player or an audience. And probably a great example of that, and I'm sorry this may be a little topical because it's about Aladdin, but the cartoon version. If you look at Jafar, he's like all these points, like he's just a giant triangle and he's got all these points everywhere. I think he's got even some on his shoulder, but his whole body is just a giant point. So you already know to kind of be like cautious of that character. And then you have the genie where everything's very rounded and very sort of sharp. That's a great example of what shape language is and how that helps to kind of push us and inform us and to sort of define the path that we want to take going forward, whether it comes to the modeling itself or the animation itself. And
like a good example would be like if you look at, say, the wicker creatures of Drusvar.
Yes,
extremely
exactly.
spiky and cruel looking.
Dangerous.
But if you compare it to the Tortolan, nice round.
Wonderful.
You know, another turtle made it to the water.
I feel happy when I'm around them. Yeah, and so this kind of shows sort of that Drusvar. I mean, everything here looks like very dangerous.
Very harsh, very unruly. And this kind of goes to like a lot of the story and lore as far as like, how did we come to this look? How did we, and the Colteran and Zandalari exist on these places, but there's a lot of lore that goes back to how this was established, as far as shape languages and stuff like that. So like with Drusvar, it's like an ancient magic area for the Drust, which is like a very cruel race that existed there long before the Coltirian. So when they show up, they're like they're battling it out, and they have this kind of military vibe. So when you look at a lot of the Coltirian kind of like armor and weapons and stuff, it's very militant and practical.
Yeah.
To like they were fighting this war. If we could pull up like some of the weapons and stuff that we might have worked on, you can kind of see that a lot of it is very much like military-esque. And I actually remember reading on the forums people arguing whether a gun axe was a practical thing. And I designed that myself based off of actual historical gun axes. Because I was like so fascinated. I'm like, they had gun axes? That's so cool. So I was like, I got to
Do they really?
Yes.
Like in real life?
It's a real thing.
See, guys, you learn something
Gun
through these
axes.
streams. Even I do.
But also a lot of their stuff is very like, you look at like the horses and their armor, it's very practical. It makes a lot of sense on how it would attach and everything. Their guns are very much a gun or a blade, almost kind of like a general-esque or a militant look. Whereas the Zandalari kind of have that going for them as well, but in a very like regal kind of way.
Right.
So if we could pull up some of their weapons in contrast. Their stuff is very ornate, almost like ritualistic.
Right.
And the
they have the money,
shape
they have the
language
space.
that they have is very angular and structured, as opposed to the sweeping shapes.
And again, that follows this motif that we've seen. Motif is sort of the word.
I love
of
the
thread.
word
I'm gonna have to
motif.
change it. I'm gonna have to stop using that. But it's sort of it's aesthetic. There we go. That'll work.
Vocabulary.
It's a good thing we're
quiz.
not live. We can do this in post.
Yeah.
But they have this sort of aesthetic that kind of, again, this is that point of it. Everything kind of feeds off of each other because you see that in the ziggurats, and that follows through into their armor, into the stuff that you guys are doing with armors, weapons, mounts, things like that. Again, all that shape language is kind of following through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But did we see this? I don't know if we saw that on stream.
I don't know if we have either.
There we go.
Well, yeah, this is kind of a lot of like the key characters of the Zandalari are represented here, and you can see the regalness of like the giant headdresses and the feathers and the gold, and it kind of represents their culture as well as just in contrast to the Coltirian. You don't get that kind of flashiness that you would see in the Zandalari.
So bombastic. I love that.
And it's awesome. It was amazing designing some of these armor sets and headdresses because you get to really go wild with it. Like. It's not form-fitting like an actual like helmet. It's very like, look at me, I have prestige.
Like a peacock. Came up the other day.
Yeah.
It's like sort of this peacock. You're showing.
Exactly.
Right? You are very confident. Again, you're just showing you're very proud of what you have.
Exactly. And their weapons and armor kind of reflect that in both races, whether it's this or that, depending on the race. We even did this on their mounts, for example. Like we did the really cool raptor mount for the Zandalari troll, and on the mount itself, it has this almost impractical amount of golden armor, like weighing it down, but it looks so cool.
Yeah.
And it's very prestigious to be like, I have a raptor mount covered in gold.
Covered in gold. You can't actually run the raptor, it's just completely heavy.
And it also parallels with the whole idea of the Loa and everything that they kind of worship and practice in their culture.
Well, this is an important part of their culture, right? Their kit, correct?
Exactly.
Like in terms of design and lore
Plus
aesthetics.
dinosaurs are cool.
Plus dinosaurs are cool. I mean, really, you don't need a reason to put dinosaurs in there.
But we have good reasons.
We do happen to have one of a reason, so that's good. But those Loa, I mean, we even see the blood trolls even have their form of Loa, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, this sort of cultural identity changes. You have the Zandalari who are just very proud, very very pristine, lots of gold, beautiful colors, beautiful buildings. Then you have the blood trolls, which is just
they're kind of gross. It's very macabre. There's a lot of
I didn't
blood.
want to say it, but you're right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
By comparison, yeah, it's very ritualistic magic.
Yeah.
And it also parallels with the Drust in a sense as well, as where it's very like evil-esque. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm saying evil from a paladin's perspective.
Of course you would be.
Yeah, I would. But yeah, the Loa echo strong throughout a lot of the troll races, and kind of the lore aspect of that is where when we were looking at, say, the Druids, the Druids became a big deal for us when we were designing, because if they practice these religious things with Loa, wouldn't they also take on the forms of Loa as shapeshifters? And for the Zandalari, we were like, all right, they're going to be Druids, but are we going to do the classic guardian bear? Are we going to do the classic feral cat? And with having done Legion, the artifact forms for the bear and the cat forms, we're like, we should do dinosaurs. And we had so much experience with doing the skin variations for them that we're like, yeah, we got to give this a try. And I think the very first example of us trying this was with the travel form for the Zandalari. We took one of the raptors and redid it and did a bunch of stuff unique to Zandalari, like if they had shapeshift into a raptor, and put some of the ornate stuff we're talking about.
Kind of building in sort of like the tusks and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and adding in the tusks as well. And that was kind of the first one we did, where we were like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
We need to do custom forms for these 2 new allied races. And then we started riffing on different ideas, and we're like, well, what kind of dinosaurs, what kind of creatures could we do for each of these?
Yeah, these are really fun to work on too. Like some of the, like, especially those like that water form was really fantastic.
Yeah, and that's something we didn't do in Legion, where you couldn't customize your water form. But now that we're doing a full suite of cool stuff for the Zandalari and the Koltiran, we're like, all right, let's do the flight form, let's do the swimming form, the bear and the cat. So we give them the full suite, and the Moonkin.
Yeah, that's right.
Moonkin gets some love for the Zandalari and the Koltiran. And we also got to design just really cool stuff. And this is another thing that I really enjoyed as I was reading online, is people arguing, hey, what dinosaur did Kenny use to design the cat druid? And
they called you out by name, right?
They didn't call me out by name, but
you felt it.
But I felt like they were talking to me, because I was like, oh, that's cool, guys. Y'all are trying to like figure out which dinosaur I used. And for me, it was a kind of an amalgamation of everything that I was inspired by, like the shape of a cat. Growing up, I had a chameleon, I've had an iguana, and I was kind of like, what's an agile, swift-looking lizard-like creature?
So it's a real Dr. Moreau character.
It's a very, and that makes it very, very Warcraft, is to kind of like put things together and come up with cool, unique creatures, though they may be recognizable as, say, a dinosaur or an iguana-esque creature.
But it's not fully, it's sort of turned.
Because I don't think iguanas have tusks. Maybe they do. But
do they?
That'd be really cool.
Check the boards, let's see.
So for me, that was a very fun project for me. Is I had so much fun doing the cat forms in Legion, and they're like, oh, I get to make a dinosaur cat form. And what's really cool in like retrospect is like, that was a conversation we all had to have.
Yeah.
Is we're like, all right.
Because again, it wasn't always completely clear.
Druids were an established thing in as Arathian lore. It's like you have the bear, the god, and the different various forms of that were for night elves and Tauren, and it was so embedded into the culture of like the druid class that breaking this mold almost felt kind of weird at first. And we're like, well, we're gonna do another cat and bear. And we're like, no, they don't worship cats and bears.
Yeah, look at their logos. And again, this is where design and lore is telling us something very specific.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was really fun to kind of delve into that and experience all of that, because we got to make dinosaurs. And the flip side of that is then we're like, well, Koltiran, what's their story? Are they going to be cats and bears as well? Well, the Koltiran showed up where the Drust were, where they're practicing this ancient magic that's kind of like a very darker version of druidic magic, where there's kind of like a macabreness to it. And that's very strong in the storytelling of the Koltiran, the Drust, Var zones in that area. Like the Waycrest Manor is an experience that is like, they didn't do so well with the Drust magic. It kind of messed them up a bit.
It didn't go well.
But in the war between the Koltirans and the Drust, you kind of get this common ground where eventually Koltirans learn druidic magic. So you're like, oh, humans are now druids.
And that starts warping into everything else that happens to them.
And the aesthetic.
Here we go.
The motifs of the Drustvar are these constructs of wicker and wood and
which look amazing.
Tangled thorns and shapes. Very, very natural, very much like a druid, be like a tree form for a druid, but also very true to the Drust vibe of being macabre, Halloween-esque and creepy.
Yeah, and it kind of goes to, and this is another topic that I think is really, really fascinating, is this color language, right? Because you have blue in Drustvar, but you also have some blue notes inside Zuldazar. How do you differentiate a blue from this blue from that blue, right?
Yeah.
We even have another image too, where it shows like there's a gold in Koltaras and a gold, and there's gold everywhere in Zuldazar.
There's a lot of gold
everywhere, but they tell you two very different things. Just even having, and you can really see it in the comparison. So we can show it here. And so I'd love to hear a little bit of thought of how important. I mean, so now you kind of everyone sees them together, you can really see how the gold on the left from Kulturas is so much more sort of sullen and dark and sort of almost worn. And then you have this very bright, warm, sort of regal gold.
Rich warmth to it.
Rich warmth.
Yeah. What's fun about these images is these are the sigils for the different races. And what we saw earlier on in the stream was some of the early images of like, what are we going to do with these races? Like, where are they going to evolve? How are we going to like elaborate on them as artists and kind of make them unique and
how do we
interesting?
actualize?
And these were done towards the end of production. Yeah. And what's cool is we can kind of see now what was maybe rough in the beginning, but still very true to the beginning. Like if you saw them side by side, you still might be like, oh, I couldn't tell that you created this much later on in the pipeline. But what's cool is you can really see the character of each race and faction because of the sigil. And some of that comes through in, like you're saying, color. And we've been throwing color around, shape language, and you can really see it in these. Whereas the Kultiran have a very like sea-worn, like kind of salts and barnacles have worn and eroded the vibrance of it. Yeah. It's very cool, chilled, harsh grit.
Grits.
We like
Every
that
come
word.
back to that.
And whereas the Zandalari is you see growth. There's plants growing on it. There's warmth.
Control almost.
There's a level of like naturalness to it in like the tusks. The gold is very warm and prestigious. And though I would say both of them are very prestigious in their own right.
Sure.
Like one is very like regal in a sense of like we are militant. We have a navy and
they've carved out their place in a very harsh location.
And they're doing great.
They're doing.
And the Zandalari are doing great as well because they have an entire city made of gold. So, and that kind of reflects in these two icons in that you can see almost an entire culture behind these. Like everything that has kind of come together, whether it's like environment, props, dungeons, and all that stuff is kind of represented as this one piece. And it's really cool to like, it's almost like you're proud of it. You're like,
yeah, absolutely.
You're like, whether you're rooting for the Zoldazar or Kultiran, it's like that is my faction.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see the culture behind all that.
So it's so funny too because it's these subtle things I think a lot of time are not always obvious when you're kind of just playing the game or you're just kind of like running through sometimes. There's a lot of, we have sort of similar subtle changes between the Kultiran and the Zandalari for animations as well. And you can see those things in like the guard poses. I may have talked about that earlier. Things like even just like the ready bows.
Oh yeah, that's really cool.
So you have like, even though this is just a ready bow, and there's not really that many ways to hold a bow. You know, you could, in terms of actually drawing the bow, you could do something like a samurai, which is sort of like very high and wide, or you could do sort of like an English longbowman, which is very low and tight. You know, so there are kind of smaller differences in terms of things. But this is sort of the work we have to kind of do is like, okay, so yes, you have a ready bow, but how do we make it distinct? And kind of coming back to your like, well, this is gold in both of these cultures, but we have to make them distinct. We have to make them recognizable as independent of that race, right?
Yeah.
So you have this Kultiran, which is again sort of a lot grittier. Again, can't use that word. We're gonna have to figure out another adjective.
Well, what I like about it, if I could speak as a character artist versus an animator.
I would love
you would love that?
I would love it.
What I love about this is that you could see like the groundedness and the sternness of the Kultiran. It was like ready to shoot, but in like almost like a gripping kind of way. Whereas the Zandalari has this like agility. Like you could see that she could probably dodge an attack because she's not so grounded in her in her pose.
There's an athleticism to the Zandalari that we really wanted to make sure was evident, right? So we really wanted to make sure that the movements and everything felt like they had this agility and athleticism to them that the Kultirans, even though they're not necessarily, you know, they're not lazy bums, they don't sit at a computer all day like I do, but they don't have the same sort of nimbleness that the Zandalari would have, right? And we want to show that in a lot of different places. And we even show that even as something like the guard poses. We had these guard poses where the Zandalari had this very comfortable vibe to them, and their angles and their lines are sort of, you know, you have sort of these like really nice sort of V shapes to them and they kind of move. But then you have the Kultirans who have this sort of very blocked sort of guard pose. Very stiff, very stern, very proper, like This is the way I'm supposed to hold, right? This is like everything has to be identical, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like position and shape.
It's echoing that like militantness
Exactly.
again, or it's like regimented.
Exactly.
And once again, like these are things
Regimented,
that
perfect.
is very common
So good.
in both. Just love words.
Yeah, I love it.
Is very common between both factions, but they have their own take on it.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is like figuring out and really kind of deciding and determining what that different take is, even though you may be able to say, yeah, this is strong and this is strong. It's like, well, that's not going to work. You got to make
what kind of strong are
What
you?
kind of strong, exactly.
Yeah.
Like this is like anchor strong and this is like agile strong, or whatever. That's silly, but but that's kind of the idea, is like you have to find ways to make them very distinct, even when they may have similar aspects to them.
Yeah, well, what's cool, even like when you look, like say at this shot, you can see like the armor and the weapons of the Zandalari are like, they have less armor in a sense. Like their chest is exposed, their feet are exposed.
Yeah.
It kind of plays to that whole idea that they could probably do a backflip while stabbing you.
Not right there though. You wouldn't want to do that.
Not, well, maybe you can base jump, but
that's true.
but whereas the Koltiran, like once again have that very like rigid, like ready, like they could take a hit and then stab you.
Yeah. They take multiple hits.
Yeah,
it's always
yeah.
that character in a movie,
Yeah.
that seems to take 20 different stabs, and you're like, why is this person?
Like
not
there's this
down
little
yet?
rogue,
It's
and
the
he's like,
mountain.
yeah, but then he's like, what are you doing? You know?
Those are always really fun to kind of follow, though, because this idea that you're trying to sort of explore why these different races are very particular and why you as a player would want to play them is it's always a fun discussion and journey to discover, like, what do we want to do with these things, and like why do some things not work, those kind of ideas. And I always think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, like and that's where we're like looking at this in retrospectively almost, is that we started this stream talking about like where did we start and look at where we're at now.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see the evolution of, it's like, it was almost like a fog of war. We're a fog of war.
Shoot, okay.
We're on a Warcraft map and we're trying to work
Yeah.
our way around and figure out some stuff. And then in the end you can look back and kind of, it makes so much sense in hindsight.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're developing and creating things, whether it's like gameplay or even like for us art, is that we've made expansions before, we've made races before, we've made zones before. It's almost like, I like this analogy of baking a cake. If
Oh, there it
anybody
is.
out there bakes cakes.
Martha Stewart?
Yeah, Martha Stewart.
Are we allowed to say that?
I just
name?
did.
I'm just kidding.
Is that
We gotta pay our
it's
rights.
like baking a cake where like, or just a recipe in general, is
Yeah.
that it's though you may be following a certain recipe, it's almost like it's a new recipe with something you've done that's similar.
Right.
And you're going to get a new result, even though you're trying to follow similar patterns that you might have followed in the past. And it's really cool. The outcome in the end is that like you've created a whole new flavor or created a whole new experience, and that's come through in a lot of these allied races we've been able to do. And what's cool is now with Zandalari and Koltiran, they're in line with all these other ones that we've offered and done, like the Void Elves or the Lightforged Draenei. And each time we do this, it kind of expands upon the world, as I might have been saying before, is that these are all part of this functioning world. And what we like to do is allow it for people to play them as well.
Well, and I think that's to the point, right? So it's it's one thing to kind of say, they're part of the story, part of the lore, and part of the sort of the history of this world. But ultimately, we want to try and get to this point where we, at some junctions, we allow you to play them, right? We actualize this race, like you're talking about the Voids, the Lightforged. We want to be able to say, what does that look like? Yes, we have sort of the stories of these races, but if we actually actualize that race and rendered them fully, what would that feel like? What does that feel like to play that particular character?
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
And what's cool too is that these are very, very fundamental to the expansion of Battle for Azeroth. You're experiencing every aspect of Zandalari culture, every aspect of Koltiran culture, and now that they're going to be playable, we can even elaborate on like the hairstyles and the color, which I think we have some cool pictures of what some of the stuff will be for customization. And they are naked.
They are naked.
But this is how we start.
You don't have to keep them that way.
No, they're wearing undies though.
That's true.
Is when we work on character art, this is where we start. We or the final product of where we start is that we're working on just the base character, and we start working on hairstyles, different facial features, different skin colors.
That customization.
the customization, and that's really what we focus on as far as character art goes. And then it's much later on that we start focusing on things like armor and weapons in regards to the actual playable characters. So yeah, it was just really cool. It's like we've been able to do all new hairstyles.
A lot of good pictures there.
Yeah, these are really cool. Yeah, everyone's naked and hanging out.
It's funny too because I remember from kind of looking at the Zandalari here. I remember at one point they were smaller. They were a tiny bit smaller. And
well, trolls are like I think one of the tallest races.
Oh, are they?
But they hunched.
But yeah, well, that's the problem.
Like the older trolls.
That's
now,
how I'm going to look when I'm 100 years old.
Yeah, well, they do it for comfort, maybe.
Yeah, this is actually the picture. So the one on the left, not me.
You're a troll.
Yeah, that is true. I've been called that. The one on the left is actually what was our original size, which is about 10% less than what we currently have. And I remember as we were kind of started, the whole city was getting really fleshed out, right? The big buildings and everything the city was just this huge, monstrous city. Monstrous is not the right word because it's a beautiful city, but it was just so large and so grand. And then we had these little Zandalaris just like walking around that just felt so kind of minuscule in comparison. So I remember there was this point where we were like, we got to make them bigger.
Yeah.
And we in animation were like, oh, that's right. We're gonna have to change some things.
Yeah,
it's not exactly a simple process, but it was one of those decisions that we thought was really important to kind of make the Zandalari as important as we thought they were. Right? We knew that they were like we want them to have an impact. We want them to have this grand silhouette in comparison to maybe if you're a human you kind of roll in or you're whatever and you kind of roll into the city. We want you to feel like sort of awe-inspired, right? So we made this decision.
Walk amongst dinosaurs.
Exactly. Exactly.
It all goes back to dinosaurs.
That always goes back. No matter where we're at.
Who doesn't love dinosaurs?
If you don't, you're wrong. But yeah, it was just this decision to say we need to raise them, scale them up a little bit bigger. So that does affect things that we end up doing later, like that we had already done, and we're like, oh, okay, well. We're gonna have to change
think about that comparison even with the Coltiran to humans.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
How big are the Coltiran compared, like not just in girth, but like they're just tall guys. They're big. Yeah. They can probably build a ship really easy because they're the grit.
What if the mountain inhabited a whole zone? That's essentially it.
Just very heroic humans.
Huge.
Lumbering. They have huge.
That kind of even catches into like the Coltiran male's run. I always find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it because it's just this big mass trying to get himself moving, and there's just this great sort of lumbering quality to his gait, and I love that.
What kind of things like that did you find like were most satisfying when animating the different races?
Emotes are always really fun because you really get to kind of actualize the culture. So when you're doing attacks and combats, it's a little bit more, you recognize that when people are playing these particular actions, it's going to be either in a raid or in a dungeon. There's going to be a lot of other things happening. So when we're doing combat animations, it's really about sort of the visual clarity of what's happening. But when we talk about sort of what are the cultural ideas that we can start to bring into the animation, it's the emotes, movement, things like your walks, your runs, your things like that. And that's kind of coming back to the Zandalari walk, right? Where it's just everything's very up.
Yes.
Like he knows where he wants to go, right? So that's where you can really start to bring in this character that that you guys have kind of informed with the shape of the character, and then environment and dungeon has informed with the environment around them, So all that kind of information is kind of building into it's like, oh, this is where we get to add these sort of cultural details. Combat stuff is a little bit more, again, it's about this visual clarity when you're actually in combat, because we know there's going to be a lot of things happening. It's very quick.
It has to read quick as well.
It has to read quick, and that's the key, right? So so there's a little bit of a difference when we talk about or when we're actually working on these animations. So so that's sort of the difference. But and the emotes and things are when we get to kind of have the
because emotes you've got more time, more frames per second.
You do, yeah. And people are going to be probably playing them inside towns or when they're talking with friends and all those other aspects where you'll actually get to see and read them. And it's where when we actually build the cities, when design is actually fleshing out these huge cities like Borealis and Zuldazar, you have all these NPCs and all these players that need to feel like Imagine if no other player was in a city, and then you came into the city, you were riding up, and you were the first player to actually enter. Would the city feel like it existed before you?
I was gonna say, y'all did some really cool stuff.
Yeah, we did do some cool stuff.
What did you do?
Good segue on that
Yeah.
one. Thanks, sir. No, we just did a lot of sort of these ambient animations that really kind of help make the world in the city feel alive,
Yeah.
right? So there's lots of, the guard poses are part of that, just people carrying things.
Also, we have like guys like leaning on the bar.
There's guys leaning on the bar, real shady
People
folk.
carrying like the
Yeah, and we talked about this
barrels
at
and stuff,
BlizzCon, where it just really helps to kind of flesh out this
it's
city's
a working
identity.
it's a working dock or
It's a working dock,
city.
and we really want you to kind of feel like
Mm-hmm.
like it's all functioning whether you're there or not, right? And so those are those fun kind of moments where you get to determine sort of the cultural identity of these things.
Like how does a Cold Tyran carry a barrel versus his Andalari?
There you go,
Completely
exactly,
different.
Completely different.
Yeah, one's more lanky or So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
You get to do a lot of fun character stuff
Yep,
through
it's
animation, whereas character art is very much about like the silhouette and the shape and the color and all that. And when it comes together, we create awesome stuff.
It's magic.
Yeah. Wizardry, I think, is what we were
Oh,
using.
you were trying to get that
I gotta
word in
sneak
there.
that in. Wizardry. The wizardry of the art team.
But yeah, it was, but you guys do a lot of that kind of stuff when you're talking about sort of the silhouettes of armor and weapons, and that's where you guys really get to kind of build that sort of cultural identity too. And I think we had seen some pictures earlier about that kind of stuff. So yeah, and it's just being able to kind of always sort of piggyback on something you might have seen one of the other artists do is this sort of just, it feeds in upon itself. It just kind of like helps to build it up and layer it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always a really fun process, a really messy process at times, but hopefully it doesn't look that way. But it's I think the end result is always really fascinating. And I know even when I've been working on it, and it's funny because even before we were doing this talk, they're like, oh, we need you to talk about Colts and Sands, and I'm like, that was okay. Yeah, I got to remember what we were doing on some of those aspects, right? And even though we would have worked on those things for quite a while, I always get so excited when I actually get to play it. And get to go in there, and just the zones are so beautiful, the cities are so beautiful, and I get to sort of like see all the life that all the people kind of bring into it. So even though we work on it, it's always still a really exciting process.
Yeah, I'm really excited to play Cold Tyran Druid.
Which is out March 12th.
Yeah.
So they brought that back in.
So to kind of wrap up what we've been talking about.
Let's do it.
It started with an early idea. We have lore. We have the old Warcraft games to kind of influence things that were kind of hinted at, even stuff in Warcraft or World of Warcraft that's been hinted at.
Yeah.
And now we've had an opportunity to kind of flesh out and really elaborate on parts of the world that are really important to the story of Azeroth and also an experience for players. And it's where it started, how we as a team kind of work together and kind of come to a conclusion and eventually ship an experience. So it's been kind of fun going over a lot of that, and also
it has us a little bit of like going down
memory
lane. Yeah, it's just like, oh yeah, that's right. That was a really cool thing to see, and to sort of like once that realization hits you, it's sort of fascinating.
So the end result is really cool.
Yeah,
and
really excited about it.
I'm super stoked to play a Cold Tyran Druid personally, and yeah. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, just thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully this kind of sheds a light on some of the processes that we do. It's always really fun. Again, it's always really an exciting time working on it. I've never worked on a project that I've just always been so happy to kind of show people.
Yeah.
And hopefully you guys enjoy it, and we hope to see you in there.
Yeah, I would echo off that even.
Do it.
Like anytime we've been able to do talks, say at BlizzCon or these kind of things, it for us as artists, it's very fun to kind of like look inward and see like our process and express that.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of passionate people that work on the character
Really
team
amazing.
and all the different disciplines of the art team.
Yep.
I, for one, I didn't always work at Blizzard. I was a player of the game back when it first came out, and I was always so excited to play it, and then eventually I got to work on the game, and I've been working on the game for 5 years now, and it's just like so fun to be a part of that as an artist and a player and experience it and express that, and be able to talk about the things that we get to work on and really show the love that we love to put into the game, because all the time, even when playing the game, I'm talking with either coworkers or friends or guild,
it's always
and we're
about
just like, wouldn't it be cool if we did something like this?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, wait, we work on the game, let's add this to the game.
We might have a little bit of control on that.
Yeah, and we talk about that stuff all the time because as we play the game, we're experiencing it, and we just want to like we want to put things that we want to see in the game as well, or like what fans want to see. And like I'm gonna close on this. One for me is playing a dwarf paladin. Where's my mount at?
I knew you were going to go
wanted
there.
to put, I wanted that so bad. And then when we announced Dark Iron Dwarves, it's like, oh, now Dark Iron Dwarf Paladin, you get a mount too, yeah. So
like a little Oprah thing, right?
So I love that as not only players but passionate artists and a team and a collective of people that are all working on a game we love. That having opportunities like this to talk to you guys and express some of our process and the things we love about what we do is very, very humbling, but also like it gets me like excited. Yeah. Can't wait to go back to my desk and make something. So thanks for joining us. It's been really awesome.
It has.
March 12th.
There it is.
Yeah.
Week of, yep.
I'm bad with numbers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.